All right. Hi, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple more seconds to let people filter in, and then we'll get started. All right, so good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Shanine. I'm thrilled to host tonight's event with Chloe Dulce Louvouezo, presenting her new book, Life, I Swear, Intimate Stories from Black Women on Identity, Healing, and Self-Trust. She will be talking with contributors Eniafebiafe Isis Adewale, Nneka Julia, and Julee Wilson, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to all of our authors and the team at Harper Design for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Just a couple of housekeeping things. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event. The first is the chat, which is the icon that looks like one speech balloon. There, you're welcome to post your comments and your thoughts. But if you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the authors, please post that question in the Q&A module, which is the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll only be pulling questions from the Q&A there. Tonight's featured book, Life, I Swear, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. at both our Fulton Street and Flatbush Ave stores, or order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll be dropping the link in the chat occasionally throughout the night. As a thanks for attending tonight's virtual event, we're offering 10% off the featured book. All you have to do is enter the coupon Greenlight Events 10 into the coupon discount section at the checkout for 10% off. And now I'll introduce our presenters tonight. Eniafebiafe Isis Adewale is a dancer, entrepreneur, project manager, and natural-born writer with a deep-rooted passion for narration and what she calls journey telling. Currently residing in Los Angeles, Eniafebiafe is the Chief Experience Officer of XE Concepts and founder of All Her Words, a platform dedicated to honoring and amplifying the voices of a fuller spectrum of women. Nneka Julia is a writer, photographer, and podcast host based in Detroit. As a daughter of immigrants hailing from Cambodia and Nigeria, her work is invariably tied to travel, culture, and the human experience. She's currently working on writing her first book. Julee Wilson is the beauty director at Cosmopolitan Magazine and leading the brand's robust beauty coverage across all platforms, including print, digital, social, and creating new ways of reaching readers. Julie's editorial career started after putting in the hard work as an intern for various magazines throughout college. She has worked in the media her entire career and has made a true dent in the industry. Our featured author tonight is Chloe Dulce Louvouezo. Louvouezo is a Congolese-American writer, mother, and advocate for women whose work is driven by discourse on identity and healing. As a storyteller, she supports creativity and belonging of underrepresented women and seeks to deepen understanding about and within communities. Louvouezo is the executive producer and the host of the Life, I Swear podcast, through which she explores nuances and insights around identity, mental wellness, and healing, told through the lens of women from the Black diaspora. Her new book, Life, I Swear, is a stunning collection of essays and photographs featuring the voices of prominent Black women reflecting on self-love, healing, overcoming trials, and finding connection as a companion and culmination to Chloe's podcast of the same name. Chloe's going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then they'll be chatting with themselves and with all of you. So take it away, Chloe.
Awesome, thank you so much. And I just want to start by thanking the contributors. Each of them just have played such a integral part of cheering this book on. It was just a vision, and all I had to do was ask. So thank you for trusting me, and thank you everyone else who is joining in. So I'm going to read an excerpt which is really a love letter that opens up the book. It's titled The Space We Deserve. And hopefully it sets some context around why this book came to be. I love stories. I love the texture and the nuances of them. I love understanding our whys of everything. Why do we feel the way we feel? And what makes us do the things we do? For Black women, being in community as we unpack and make sense of our whys and our lives is an outlet that nothing else in the world can provide. Our sharing of uncertainties, vulnerabilities, and trepidations about life makes space for a special intimacy. An intimacy we are rarely afforded because the world expects the strength of Black women to be demonstrated through restraint of our true selves. Challenging seasons of life remind us how much intimacy and feeling understood are gateways to personal healing. After a trying year in 2019, I started to document conversations with other Black women about personal stories that have enlightened us to answer some of these questions, as deep dive dialogues in My Life I Swear podcast and as stories in this book. I've always considered myself a cat with 9 lives, rebirthed in each new season, one that emerges from fires at times scarred, but layered in stories that together tell the tale of the dance of this life. And it's been an incredible one. I've lived in 11 cities, 5 countries, and traveled the world. I've been in abusive and loving relationships, home birthed a prince of a son, grew a family, also been a single mother, raised by a single mother. I've taken risks, led a spontaneous life, explored artistry, and ebbed and flowed through loss and glory. Tell me something you've been through, and I bet I can relate. Give me a story of promise and hope, and you're speaking to my spirit. Give me a story of pain and struggle, and know in my eyes that I deeply understand. I've spent years trying to find the words to articulate the breadth of what this journey of life has meant to me. Putting pen to paper through stories of loss and love, discovery and rebounds is the only way I know how. The pages that follow are an anthology of stories from Black women about the falling down, the cycles, the post-traumatic growth, and the resilience. In curating these stories, I've had the blessed opportunity to speak to other women of the Black diaspora from around the country and the world, all who have shared from a place of vulnerability and truth. Their stories capture a range of experiences and reflections that offer nuance and variation of our human nature to discover new facets of ourselves. They represent voices and sentiments of our time, chronicled for our collective healing. So, with that said, as I think about this past year and a half, it was just a year and a half that I pitched this book. I condensed the making of this book really between 3 to 5 months. And one of the questions I get often, because as I look at the back of this book, all of the women are so diverse, and some I knew and some I didn't. I knew Julie. I did not know Nneka and Isis, Eniafebiafe Isis, before reaching out to them. But you all said yes. And I'm just like forever in awe at that, because one, as someone who has almost hoarded my own pain and not, allowed pride to get in the way of asking for help. I finally got over that, and I invited you all to be part of this little idea that I had. And at the time, I think the intention of the book was more self-serving for myself, because it's important to myself to just release a lot of the stories that I poured onto the pages. But as I, really leaned into the stories of other women, I knew that there was power in the collective. And so I don't take for granted that you all said yes, because I'm asking you literally, can you give me a piece of your heart? You don't know me like that, but can you give me a piece of your heart and trust that I won't drop it and I will see it through? And so my first question is not so much why did you say yes to me, but why did you say yes to sharing your story? And I'll start with Julie, because you were the one among the three that I did know.
Yes, I trusted you. I knew you. Known you for several years. We have a mutual friend, and so I felt comfortable, obviously, in our conversations. But it's different. I think it's always different when you have like a personal relationship and you're talking about things, and then the added layer of like, oh, and now I have a podcast and I want to talk to you about things. And it's like, okay, but it's still just like voices, and you're still behind some type of, like guard. And then it's like, well, now I want to put your words and your story in a book. And for me, I'm very much like open book, pun intended, much to my husband's chagrin. I'll like hop on like Instagram live and talk about my vagina. So it's not necessarily like that crazy that maybe I would want to open up, but in particular for this book and this collection of stories that you pulled together, I was so excited about it. And I was more than willing to be a part of it because it was important that there was this collection of stories from Black women showing all of our different struggles and triumphs and how we got through things. People want to feel seen and want to feel like they're not alone. And I knew that like if I shared just even a piece of my story, that someone could read it and be like, oh my gosh, that happened to me, or oh my gosh, like I felt that same way, or like I think the same thing about myself, and like maybe I could get out of that funk the way Julie did. So for me, it was important how my story could help somebody else. So it was a very easy yes.
Okay. And I'm curious, thank you so much for that. I feel like you've always been, not just for me, but for other Black women, just such a champion. And Eniafe, I'm wondering, your story is, it's about race and the notion of race being all encompassing in terms of our identity. I feel like it was not just a safe space that was necessary, but it required you to also be brave in telling your story. And it's one perspective that you hadn't yet shared out loud. And so I'm wondering, and we've had conversations back and forth about the trepidation about sharing. And I'm wondering what drew you to be brave, but now that you're also on the other side of sharing that story, how does it feel to own it?
I still get nervous talking about it, like even now. My heart is, sort of beating. I think because even in ownership of our stories and sharing them, you can never be sure how it's going to land. I equate writing and sharing words to like putting instruments in someone else's hands, and you never know how they're going to play them. And so it's still a bit of a nerve-wracking thing, because also I'm still getting comfortable in owning my like unease in that way. And it's funny because as we're bouncing around between my first and middle name, Eniafe and Isis, that in itself is a part of this like race story. Eniafe is very much my Nigerian, my Yoruba heritage. Isis is one of my middle names. I made the very clear decision to start going by Isis because I wanted to try to disconnect from being so other, from being so different. And so I, unable to change my name to Janet, like Jackson, because that's what I wanted to do when I was younger. My mom was like, absolutely not. I chose the next best thing that would help me to more so assimilate. Now, when I was in middle school going to high school, I couldn't quite articulate that was what it was. And even still, me just saying this right now, I'm like, yeah, that's all a part of the same story. It's still kind of this story that I'm digging at, and I'm kind of exploring, myself. So we always talk about sharing our stories is much like finding your way while you're on the way. And so you're tripping over your feet, and you're uneasy in the terrain, and you're trying to make sure you choose the right, quote unquote, right words, and that you're being aware of, who you're talking to and their experience and how different it might have been to yours or similar to yours. And it's, it's still, there's still a bit of unease there. But each time I have the opportunity to share and do it in a space where I'm not being judged, and where I can explore like openly and and freely, it helps. It's kind of like it helps soften the terrain, and it helps me get a little bit more used to it. So, but still, it's a little nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I had, as you know, a lot of anxiety like leading up to the release of this book, because there was so much that I put into the book, into my essays, that I hadn't yet talked about out loud. Child trauma, sexual trauma, abusive relationships, but then also this like existential identity piece as it relates to race, because I am of mixed race, also third culture kid, bicontinental, bilingual, bicultural, multi, exposure. And it was never quite defined for me. And so, that was a big part of my journey growing up. And Nneka, you and I share a similar experience of being third culture kids, which I think is what like felt so magnetic with you.
Definitely.
And you describe it in your book exactly as having parents that never experienced what it's like to be Black in America. I also had a mother who never experienced what it's like to be a Black girl. I grew up with a white mother, single mother in sub-Saharan Africa, and so even that was like, she could never give me a blueprint or even guide me. But I'm wondering, as it relates to your like holistic identity, I'm curious, without the guide of either parents to guide you where you are, which is really in the middle, what other influences in your life kind of guided your reality of being Black in America during your upbringing that made you more comfortable articulating who you are?
There's been so many influences, I think, like, especially living in America or growing up in America. It's like you have by fire, by force, you have the fact that you're going to get treated a certain way, regardless of how much you want to say I'm ethnically Cambodian or I'm ethnically Nigerian. Here, I attended a predominantly white Catholic elementary school and high school, or elementary school and middle school. And there were probably about like 3 Black kids. And we all had just an array of microaggressions and macroaggressions thrown our way. And then you have like the choice, which is the pop culture was huge to me at the time. So it's like I was watching Sister and watching, Tia and Tamara. I was watching, how Hillary Banks acting on Fresh Friends. I was watching Moesha. I was listening to Lauryn Hill's album, and you're watching a performance, right? But you're also in a way watching like who you think that like young Black girls want to be. So it's ideal that I'm looking at, and I'm like, oh, okay, like it's much more dynamic than what's between these 4 walls.
Right.
So I think that besides pop culture, a couple of friends that I was able to make along the way that showed me that we're not a monolith, obviously, that, you know, I played sports as well, so that you can be athletic, you can be a part of the mathletes, you can be, you know, there are so many hands in the pot to form what I deem as my Black American identity.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy thing, especially I think having an Asian mother in that regard, because there's, as you know, just with your mother, Chloe, that there's just a lot of things that you cannot explain, and you're forced to learn by fire. Even something as simple as hair is an issue, right? And it's a battle, and your mother wants hers, you know, your hair to look like hers, and it just will not bend to that flat iron. So it just is, you know, identity is such an interesting thing. Culture is an interesting thing. It's so nuanced. It's so much more dynamic than fixed. And there's been so many dynamic women that have shown me what it is to be their definition of a Black woman in America.
I love that. And that is the first part of the book, is sum of my parts, SUM, is I am all of the influences. And my upbringing has not been linear, as I think it relates. I think all of us can relate to that. But this idea of upbringing, Julie, I'm curious. A lot of our conversations have been about intention setting in the morning, pep talking ourselves, you know, being that anchor, being that champion for ourselves when the world outside of literally our front door can't always offer us that or choose not to. And I'm wondering, in your upbringing, was this this intention setting and the being so thoughtful with the language that you choose to use to yourself to affirm yourself, was that a practice that you cultivated, kind of like Nneka says, through the fire? Or was it something that was innate in your upbringing with your family?
I think it was a little bit of both. My parents were definitely very intentional about saying, like, speaking to myself, my sister, and my brother, you know, how great we were. And like, you know, I grew up in predominantly white, you know, areas. And so, you know, like Nneka was saying, like, when there's like only a few of you, you have to, you know, and I'm wanting my hair like Becky's and wanting to go like swimming every day in the chlorine pool and not watch, you know, like it wasn't going to happen for me, you know? So my mom and my dad, you know, reminding me that my beauty mattered and that my smarts, my intelligence, the way I treated people mattered. One of my mom's like favorite phrases, pretty is as pretty does. So it was all about like being yourself and being your full self. I also had a special needs brother. So, you know, having a brother like that, with his inabilities, you know, it was always, I was also always reminded of how blessed I was, that I was able to do a lot more than my big brother was. And I think that helped cultivate this idea of gratefulness and telling myself that, you know, those affirmations like you're talking about and how I set my intentions every day. I think having that, moving through life with a grateful heart and knowing how blessed I was to be in my family and to be, you know, given the education I was given and all of those things, I think that helps with being able to speak it and to put it out in the world.
One of the quotes that I just love in your essay is, "So much of our world today is a farce, and it's important to dismantle false perceptions of perfection." And I love that. And I feel like that quote in your essay is why I chose to end with you in the book. But, you know, and vulnerability and just like transparency of our imperfections is really a through line in the book. And I love how comfortable you are in talking about it, and in kind of the spirit of like your family raised you being your full self and showing the world your imperfections. Was that the idea of false perceptions? Was that something that you learned in adulthood and career?
For sure.
Okay, because I think that so many of us, or I know I did, almost fantasize and romanticize the notion of belonging. And then when we get into, spaces that are unwelcoming, we measure our own value against, whatever status quo, typically white or male dominated, whatever it may be. But what's been your experience dismantling or unraveling these perceptions of perfection in adulthood?
I think it's a part of my like responsibility as a storyteller and being in media, especially when there's so many eyes on your work and like the things that you say and, all of the things that you work on, the content that you create. For me, I am, again, an open book, but like, I think it's also a responsibility of mine to be that way, because I think, to your point, everyone has these perceptions about what this life is giving. I'm the beauty director for the biggest women's media company in the world, not the country, in the world. I still live in my 4-story walk-up in Harlem. I'm paycheck to paycheck. Like, I don't own a home. I still, I think that is important to say too, not to be like, oh, I'm poor. Like, no, it's not that. It is to show that like, you can work this hard, still be living my dream, and not be where society thinks that you should be, and like, that's okay. I'm still blessed. I always say to my husband, I'm like, if this is as good as it gets, we did damn good. Like we did that, So do we want more? Do I want more for my family? Do I want to create some type of generational wealth for my boys? Of course. But I do think that sharing your struggles and, again, dismantling what people think this life should look like. This is my life. Somebody else could be, living way more fancier than I am, but I want people to see that like, this is a version of what having it all is, So, so yeah, I find a lot of pride in pulling back the curtain and being like, I'm good, I'm blessed, all of those things, but just know that it's not all like Dior dinners and like, like all this stuff. I also say that too. I'm going to shut up in a second. But like, even with like the free stuff, everyone's like, oh, the gifts and like the beauty products and the this and the that. And I'm like, yes, all of that is great, is a perk of the job. Does it pay my rent? Does it pay my kids' tuition? No. Like I have like 50 bottles of shampoo in my house. What is that doing? Other than pissing off my husband because we have no room for 50 bottles of shampoo, so it's like, that's great. And the things are great, but it's not necessarily contributing to my larger goals, which doesn't make me not work for those goals in other ways. I'm gonna get there, but don't be fooled by all the fancy, shiny things that like social media shows you.
Yeah, no, I think it's, I think all of those experiences can exist at the same time. When we all have this duality that we're balancing. Was in a conversation, I think it was yesterday, or maybe it was, I'm too tired, and it was with you, Eniafe, but we were talking about, heartbreaks and breakthroughs can happen at the same time. Whatever that pain point and that joy point can happen at the same time.
Yeah.
And Eniafe, I'm kind of on this theme of perception. As you kind of return to yourself today if that's the language that you use, and thinking about where you were then, that girl in Lake Elsinore, and the perception that, I don't know, burdened that experience, childhood, and now comparing it to yourself as a writer. I'm wondering, how has your relationship with perception changed between the two women that you were and are?
Yeah. I mean, now I understand that there's these different windows, different looking glasses. So there's, how I'm seen, how I see me, my ever, evolving self. I think I understand kind of like the idea of perception versus being younger. It's this word, but there's no like actual lived experience that kind of gave me a true understanding of what, perception is. And so I know that there's all these different kind of like lenses that I'm being looked at and looked through. And it's kind of in my daily walk, a constant like reminder to see myself through my lens. And my lens is going to be the most in depth, the most intricate, the most multifaceted, because I know all these things that people outside of me, don't know. But then also understanding that as I move throughout the world, they can only see but so much of me because they're only looking at the lens through which they, through which they know me. And so I think a lot of it is a lot of grace too, that, I've developed in not, I guess, getting so caught up on the perception of others, because it's sometimes, wasted time. And as I'm sure all of us can attest to, like some people only want to see you how they see you. And it has a lot more to do with their just lens on life in general, than purposefully kind of like looking at you in a hurtful or derogatory way. But I kind of have to let all that go, leave that at the door, and just really focus on, but how am I seeing myself? How am I seeing myself? How am I seeing myself? And just always come back to like that inner kind of, looking glass. That's not to say that misperceptions and misconceptions still don't hurt deeply, because at the end of the day, we all want to be seen in our truth and understood like in our truth. And so when that's not achieved, especially after we've kind of, as Julie said, like peeled open the book to the point where you can like see the binding, how you peel open a book, like so tough, you're seeing to the binding. That's not to say that after you've done that and you're still, misinterpreted, that doesn't hurt, but it kind of creates a soft landing, or kind of like a home for me to like come back to. And it's just like, okay, like let me come back to myself, like let me come back to myself and see myself as I know that I am. So.
That and I agree, and I think I follow in your imprint, and seeing ourselves and wondering, Nneka, I've often thought of, and I think we're all storytellers, and that's why this combination of women makes so much sense, because I regard all of you as really amazing, beautiful, contoured storytellers in your own right. And one thing, Nneka, I think I've said this to you, but I don't think I like underscored it enough. When we last talked, I think the first time we spoke was definitely spring 2020. Sorry. But you said, and it's somewhere in it's somewhere in your book, you talk about creating an archive of understanding. I don't know what about that just like pierced me. And it's like, it has literally, it comes in my head probably every other day of my life since the first day I met you. And you
Wow.
said that. And one of your quotes in your essay is, no human being goes through this life unscathed or untouched by an experience that forcibly demands that we pause, that we reflect, that we change. And so while Eniafe, kind of walked us through her process of seeing herself, I'm wondering how you, as a storyteller, the phenomenal storyteller that you are, how do you use storytelling to see into other people, or just the power of, can you speak a bit to just the power of storytelling to be able to kind of see into people in the way that you describe it in your essay?
Of course. Thank you, Chloe. One, thank you. But to echo, very much so what Julie said about just vulnerability. Like if you only share your successes, you build a gulf. If you share some of your failures, you build a bridge. Because most people, I think we're all constantly online. We're constantly being fed images and stories, right? Very curated stories about success, about what we should be wearing, what we should look like, what our journey towards this position in life should look like. And it's just, it becomes just overkill of like, there's no, you start to feel like no one is struggling, which is not true. It's absolutely not true. So I think that, I had a moment. I was in Morocco, and I've been shooting photography for over 10 years now. And, there's a point where my friend was like art directing this camel as to where to sit, right? And, we took this beautiful photo, and the trip was good. There were some lows of the trip that weren't really discussed. And I posted this beautiful photo of this camel that I was riding. And I just had a moment where I was like, there's like, yes, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but like, what are words worth then? Because this is not like, nobody knows what I'm going through at this point in time when I'm sharing this photo of this gorgeous camel in Morocco. So, I started working on passing through my first podcast at the time, and started telling stories, backstories about some of the places that I've been and the people that I've met. And no other work that I've put out has had as much effect from people all over the world just contacting me and saying like, hey, I went through a breakup during this period. Wow, I've dealt with a person that's like that. This made me think about this. So it's the nuance, like all of the meat is in the nuance. It's not in just the steak, like, so I think that storytelling has the power to do that. Being vulnerable has the power to do that, because it's like, I have nothing. I'm at a beautiful place in my life where I feel like I have nothing to lose by telling you about my life, about telling you, like Julie said, like, hey, I might not like, it's, since everybody wants to talk about finances, like, it's like, may not be I'm not Jeff Bezos, like I've worked for the past 15 years with my family staffing agency. Like I've dealt with individuals with developmental disorders and mental illness, but nobody wants to hear about that because it's not a glamorous photo on Instagram, So it's like all these experiences color who we are. And I think that no matter the medium that you choose to tell your story, just tell it in full. That's the power of storytelling, and the power of all the ingredients of who we are.
That's so good. Yeah, no, one reason I chose each of you to be contributors is because you're all able to articulate what my heart feels in ways that I have not. So no, thank you for painting that so beautifully. I love, like color and nuance texture and layers, those all add to just how expansive we are. And I'm wondering, and also just the word should, like, rings, like what we should be doing, how we should be looking, how we should be healing. Julie, in your experience, how difficult is it in breaking down the shoulds as they surround Black women?
Ugh, so many shoulds.
Breaking down, and from your lens and just in media, breaking down the assumption that Black women are a monolith, particularly in a non-Black media space now.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many shoulds, but I like throwing them out the window. Even with like, I'm the first Black beauty director at this publication. This publication was founded in like the 1800s. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? So maybe I shouldn't be this person, but I am. I'm a size 16 woman in fashion and beauty. Like, I can't hardly find clothes. I know that also this top is really small, which is why I keep playing with it. But it's like stuff like that. Like, I should be able to do that. I should look a certain way to have this job or to do those things. And at every turn, I'm kind of like, well, this is what you get. And hopefully that creates other examples of what this can be, right? And the fact that I don't take my seat at the table for granted, and I make sure I say those things. I say, hi, I'm a size 16. You want me to go on the Today Show and talk about these things? I can't even find like, enough amazing clothes for me to wear and like represent myself, blah, blah, blah. Like, fashion needs to change, beauty needs to change. I talk about it in like the way I edit my stories. A quick example, like, is I just did like a silk press story in Cosmo, which they've never done before. And like when I pitched it, they were like, what is the silk press? And I'm like, okay, how do I break this down? It is a blowout. It's our blowout, right? And everyone was like, oh, that's great, that's amazing, whatever. And then as they're editing the piece, they were like, well, a lot of our readers won't know that terminology, silk press. We should explain it. And I'm like, no. Like, we're not explaining this. Like, and again, that is like breaking down the shoulds. Like you might, like, the white readers might have to skip over this one. Whoever's reading this story knows exactly what a silk press is. I don't need to over explain what a silk press is. This is not an explainer for our white readers. They have Google, they have Siri, they'll figure it out. So I know that is a roundabout way of answering your question, Chloe, but it is a part of my journey in my profession of the shoulds, right? Like, breaking down that, like, we should have to explain ourselves to people. We don't. It is what it is. They might not know what that story means. Skip over it. I did a story about the beauty ritual in which we protect our hair every night. Never done in the magazine before. And I'm like, I don't need to explain what a doobie is. I don't need to explain what a bonnet is. Like, whoever's reading the story knows exactly what it is. And then, like, let's keep it moving, right? So I think those are also ways in which we like break down those shoulds.
I love that. I'm gonna, this is like the perfect segue. I was, on Saturday, I was in conversation with Glory Edom, who leads Well Read Black Girl, and she just came out with a book called On Girlhood. And it includes, it's also a collection of stories from the Well Read Black Girl Library. She read out loud part of one of the stories or essays by Zora Neale Hurston. And it goes, or this particular excerpt, and I'm gonna make it come full circle. But Zora Neale Hurston writes, "I am not tragically colored. I do not mind at all." And this idea of, I don't need, or I shouldn't have to provide an explainer. I don't need to explain myself. I am who I am in all my, all my Blackness, all my riches. I am who I am. You either get on board and, join the party. And if you don't, I do not mind. And that, now pivoting to you, Eniafe, that feels like it echoes what I hear you describe your mother as. And in your essay, you write of your mother, "She does not ask permission to be who she is. She does not quite require that she be understood." And in parentheses, she does not offer an explainer. And so before we pivot to Q&A, I want to ask you, as a writer, would you describe your love for writing as a defiance to needing to feel understood, or as a longing to feel understood through your words?
So I think once we begin to share anything, share any aspect of our lives, like especially, our work, our art, there always becomes this question of, who are we doing it for? As if the sharing of it automatically means that it's not for ourselves. I write first for myself. I think for myself, it's a need to understand the parts of me that I've grown into but haven't yet caught up with. It's also, I wrote this piece on, she believes in looking back, not to, go that way, but to understand, where she got lost, how she, how she found her way back, where she was hurt, how she healed. Like, it's this, it is like this field, for understanding. And it's for me, because it's not until I can understand myself, then if I do decide to explain to someone else, that I even, have that roadmap of how to do it. So it's not, sometimes it is defiance, because I do use my words to kind of like buck the shoulds or the expectations, in my own way. And sometimes even the expectations that I've put on myself. But more than anything, it's to have this catalog of understanding for myself, to myself, of myself. In Toni Morrison's documentary, The Pieces I Am, if you haven't watched that yet, it's on Hulu. It is amazing. I've watched it way too many times. But there's this part where she says, "The only way I can know and own what I know is to write it, let you read it, so we both know."
Mm-hmm.
And like, never have I heard, words that so instantly and matter-of-factly and concretely captured, like, this is why I write for me, and then this is why I share. To own what I know for me, and then to, share that knowing, and even open up the door for knowing, for others who may be where I am, or headed to where I am, or have been where I am, etc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Archive understanding, though, Nneka, you said that, and like that too. I was like, yes, that's exactly, like, that's what it is. That's what it is. And that's what it is. That's what our stories are. They are archives for our understandings. So
I love that. Thank you all. I'm sifting through some questions that we got. S. Williams, Eniafebiafe wants to know, was there an experience you had where you learned words and language have power? A particular experience.
That's hard to say. One of the first, I wouldn't even say pieces, but I used to be a ballerina. It's what took me to New York. I moved from Los Angeles to New York when I was 16, the summer before my senior year. Studied at the Dance Theater of Harlem, was going to undergrad at the same time. And at a certain point, I decided to walk away from dancing. And that was my first time like coming away from what I did and being so immersed in who I am, because everybody, like, I was a ballerina. So that was my first time like kind of experiencing an identity crisis, because everybody was like, oh, well, what are you going to do now? And I'm like, I'm a whole ass undergraduate student, guys. Like, you know, I'm trying to get through school, trying to like start, you know, a life. But I was experiencing so many emotions. I was sad. I felt like a failure. I was questioning who I was as well. And I sat outside the dorms at Fordham University at Lincoln Center, and I had like this notepad, and I just started writing, like pouring all of these emotions, how it happened, what led me to my decision, all these emotions on to these pages. And I wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote until like I had put the whole experience like on paper, like explained it, you know, on paper, and like released the weight of it, right? Like literally put on paper all the heaviness that I had been feeling. And I just remember feeling like a breath of fresh air. I later threw that pad away accidentally in cleaning out my dorm room, but I will never forget like the pouring that happened onto that paper. And that's probably one of my first memories of the power that words had for me. And there's it, you know, the power has changed since then. And, you know, when I have started sharing words and the experience having somebody read the words and tell me like, oh my God, like you said everything I haven't been able to say, you know, like you say, Chloe. But yeah, writing about my experience stepping away from the dance world, that was probably one of the first times where I realized the power of writing things down to let go.
I love that. And Charnay Sanders has a question that I think is unintentionally intended for Nneka. It's about storytelling and restoring yourself as a storyteller. And I've found this even as I've gone on this book tour and sharing my story, and then other people, and even as a podcaster, receiving a lot of stories, either through readers or listeners or guests or contributors, and feeling like I'm absorbed, you know, as an empath, really absorbing the sentiments, the emotions, the highs, the lows that go into people sharing your stories with you. And I'm wondering, Nneka, how do you, and wondering through by way of Charnay, how do you set, as a innate storyteller and lover of, you know, lover of other people's stories as a means to connect, how do you also balance, you know, boundaries that you have to keep to either replenish your own creativity, or to, sometimes I feel people's stories so much that I'm like, am I feeling that, or are they feeling that? You know, there's a thin line. But I'm wondering, you know, and you've done a lot of held a lot of conversations with a lot of people. What's your experience in that? Shani wants to know.
I think you have to be able to take a step back. You have to, like, I just saw something today. I read something about, like, artists and writers aren't supposed to be producing content 2 to 5 times a week and expect it to be like the greatest work of art. Eniafe is talking about Toni Morrison. It's like Toni wasn't making reels. Like, no offense to reels, but like she wasn't out here taking 20 hours out her week making reels and then gonna write the bluest eye. That just wasn't gonna happen. So it's like anything, like what makes this cup valuable is the space. So what type of space are you creating in your life to where you can actually like replenish, and what replenishes you? So it's like, for me, I know I'm a very unpleasant person if I'm not reading a lot. Like, if I'm not reading a lot and in turn writing a lot, like it's cyclical for me. It's not like I can't have one without the other. So I take, ever since I've been on social media, I'm known for taking pretty long breaks without any information at all. So I do that when I feel like I need to just hear my own voice. We're constantly, like I said before, just consuming. So what does it sound like when society's soundtrack is turned off for a second and you don't know what's going on and what people are tweeting about or reposting in their story? Today, what's a hot topic today? When you remove yourself, like on some Walden stuff, like you can actually hear yourself think. You can hear how you feel. And I find myself doing that often, especially this year. I'm like, this is like 2020 part 2 for for me. So I'm like, I've needed a lot of space to be able to process how I felt and to be able to dig back into the stories that I'm going to tell very soon, because it's like taking yourself back there, even as storytellers, writers, artists, it's an exhausting thing to go back into a space, live there for a little bit, extract what you need in terms of story, and now share it with the world. It's exhausting. So I think it takes some time to really like replenish your soul, fill your cup, and come back better than ever. Like, the world can wait.
Yeah, no, that's true, and timely for me. I think I'm gonna take 2022 off. Interesting timing.
The year. The year.
I will be unplugged. Thank you for that. And I'm going to ask one last question for Julie. And this is from Ebony Davis. She has 2 questions, but what advice, insight do you have for other Black women who are feeling more urged to share their stories, especially as we shift into a new year and a new season? And to piggyback off of that, I would also love you to also share if there's a mantra that you use when you do your morning intention setting as well. But that's a 2-pronged question for you, Julie.
Got it. First of all, Ebony Davis is a queen of the highest order. If you guys don't know who Ebony is, she's just amazing and such a light. She is a very notable and big model, but she is also just an amazing storyteller. I've worked with her and her storytelling over the years. So this question is kind of funny because I think she's such a great storyteller herself. But any advice on other people sharing their stories? It's hard. It's not easy. And you don't have to be Toni Morrison. We keep using her as a reference, but she's a great reference. You don't have to be a Toni Morrison level, writer or speaker to tell your stories. It's yours. You get to tell it. It could be a haiku, like, honestly, like whatever it is, it can be interpretive dance. We have a dancer in the room here, like, it can, the way in which we express ourselves can be so different. It can just be a picture. It can be, you know, a line from someone else's poem that just speaks to you and your existence. So my call to action would just be do it, you know, and, you know, you can take breaks, and it doesn't have to be, you know, 3 reels a week, because I'm exhausted even thinking about a reel. I'm always like, what happened to a good old fashioned boomerang? I mean, was that not okay? Now I have to splice and dice and speed up and slow down, and it's a lot. But I'm grateful, nonetheless, I'm grateful for all the different ways in the technology that is presenting itself in order for us to tell our stories. Because I do think that there are certain stories which I want to tell through a reel, but there are certain stories I want to tell in a different way. Just tell them. We need more women, people, thems, everyone telling their story. Men, women, thems, everyone telling their stories, to again feel seen and to feel not alone. You know, I like cry 3 times a week, legit, because I'm so scared of not telling my story or not getting something out, being on my deathbed on some coulda, woulda, shoulda shit, like not being able to live my purpose or my magic the way I'm supposed to. And honestly, there's still a lot of fear in me. So my mantra to answer that question, you know, in the morning, I use the word dope. I overly use the word dope because I do think it encapsulates a lot of my life and like what I want to be and the people around me. So I do tend to say, like, look at myself in the mirror and say, you're dope. You're doing the dope things. You're raising the dope humans. Like, your life is dope, right? But I'm also really meditating a lot on fear. I have a lot of fear. And it's sad, and it makes me sad, and it frustrates me that I move in fear a lot, you know, but I feel like a lot of us do that. I have to pay my bills. I have to, you know, provide for 2 whole humans that I created, like all of these things. And like that fear, I think, is also preventing me from doing those goals that I want to do. But I know that I have to leap over that fear and get to where I need to be, because tomorrow is not promised. So beyond the dope mantra, I'm trying to tell myself every day to be fearless.
Mm-hmm. And for anyone who's wondering which essay was hers, it's Go Forth and Be Dope. But no, I remember.
There's that word again. I swear to God, if I got $1 for every time I use the word dope.
I love it. But one of the things that I remember coming up in my conversation with you is, how do we balance living through the fragility of life while still holding on to faith? And is just this, you know, overarching, constant, omnipresent theme, I think, in my life as well. I think that's all. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I want to thank you all, each of you, greatly, dearly. This is so special to me. You have no idea, to just be able to, you know, when I think about where I was prior to deciding to do this book, it was at a season where everything I thought made sense really just didn't work out. Divine intervention, but I do, you know, taking myself back to that moment, I desperately needed community. I desperately needed community. And even though I did not know any of you, and I knew Julie, but we hadn't truly connected outside of really motherhood, I knew that there was a piece of your stories, your perspectives, your backgrounds, your insights, where without you knowing it, you were part of my community. I didn't need to be close to you to feel that. I just needed to know that I wasn't journeying in silo. And so, you know, unbeknownst to you, each of you have played a role, just in my, you know, the most, I guess, the fastest pace of spiritual, emotional, mothering development has been in the last 2 years, really and truly. And I credit it to the book, but the book is such a reflection of who I am, who I love, what I love, and you three are part of that. And I champion you as much as you all have championed me. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined today, and all of your amazing questions. If there is a way that Greenlight Books can send me all of the unanswered questions, I'm happy to type away and share just my thoughts and reflections. But today I wanted to hear from the contributors who really made this book possible, because I would not have had the confidence to do a book by myself. So just thank you for holding my hand in the process.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chloe. You're amazing. Thank you for having us be a part of this amazing, amazing book.
Yes,
Thank you.
love you all. I love you all.
Love you, love you.
Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you,
Bye,
Chloe.
guys.
This was so beautiful. I put the link in the chat one last time. Make sure to put in Greenlight Events 10 for 10% off. And I hope everyone gets a copy. This is such a beautiful group of people. Thank you all for being here and have a great night. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.